fact, yesterday we had a very general discussion. We talked about, well, it was kind of, an orientation that we were developing towards what we are going to discuss today. And we talked about the business environment in the external factors, the pandemic, its effect on the travel industry, and very briefly, I mean, I just touched upon the case study which has been sent to you. In fact, today I was reading it again, and I found that it is a very, very useful case study. And especially the important thing is that it is written from the perspective, it is written by the two executives who have managed Navras. It's not written by any academician. So it is all about practical insights. So I would request you to sometimes, go over the case again and again, make yourselves into groups of two, three, four, whatever is, suitable for you. Make yourselves into groups of, friends and discuss it. What are the issues that have been, highlighted in the case, and subsequently, inshallah, we'll have a discussion in the class also. One more case study I have identified, and that is almost on the similar lines, and that you will, I'm sure, when I share it with you, you'll enjoy it. It's about the international expansion of McDonald's. What are the strategies that it has used, and how it has made it itself a household name in almost every country worth its salt. So coming back to our discussion, as we were talking about that how the companies are going to make an entry, what are the factors that guide the the choice, or I would say the strategic choice for the companies to enter into the international markets. So primarily there are two important issues. One is the risk, the commitment that is required, the involvement, the element of control, and the risk which is required. So one needs to do, some kind of a trade off. If you are a small startup firm, maybe in such a situation you might not be able to commit large amount of resources. You may fall short of the kind of involvement that is required. So in such a case, you may you know start as a domestic marketing firm, right? So, and gradually, depending upon the success or failure that you meet in the initial attempts, you can you know modify your strategy in the international markets, right? So there are certain modes that we will be discussing. I'm sure most of you are already aware, right? We start with slide number 30. That is the indirect exporting. Now this is the I would say the starting point for some of the firms. They they're not even selling it to the intermediaries or the importers abroad. They are rather selling the products to the home country intermediaries. I mean, there are buyers who are located in the home country, and they ultimately sell it to the international buyers. So this is a very, very primitive, very, very basic kind of an arrangement. And perhaps, it is too premature to call it indirect exporting. It's like, you're just a supplier. You don't know who is buying your product eventually. So there's a middleman, there's an intermediary who is buying the products from you and selling them abroad. So there is least amount of risk involved. The return on your money is guaranteed because you're selling it to the intermediary. That person is giving you money, but you don't have any control over your international operations. You may be a fully, 100% export oriented unit, but there is no contact between the manufacturer and the international buyer, right? Because there is an intermediary, there's a middleman who is, or you may also call it as a broker, I would say, a better word, right? This person is, kind of doing all the, the marketing, is taking care of all the, the formalities, the documentation which are required for sending the consignment abroad, clearing the customs and other things. So, but this is obviously, as we were talking about, that this is just the beginning. This is the starting point, right? So, this is obviously not very relevant from our point of view because you are using the distribution system of exporters with the established systems of selling abroad, and they handle the entire export function or the export operations, right? And you are just a supplier. So the next step is that once you realize that your product is successful, it is in demand in the international markets, and you are constantly getting orders. So now is the right time to explore the international markets. Obviously, nobody is so, ignorant that the manufacturer does not know where their products are being exported or where in the international markets they are being marketed. So it's important that now you take control in your own hand and time to do away with the middlemen, right? So now the situation calls for identifying the markets, exploring them, identifying the buyers abroad, the agencies or the retailers who will be ready to, display your product, who will be ready to act as resellers to the consumers in the international markets. So this in this case now you are into the direct exports, and the firm is handling its export functions using its own in-house export department. So now the situation calls for setting up an export department and people who specialize. So now this is a very important thing, even from the point of view of the organizational structure, that in addition to the domestic marketing department, you have to have an international marketing department which takes care of or which will handle the international operations, right? And obviously, some kind of services would be required. Either you can have your own people who can manage the following functions like the shipping functions or retailing and other things, freight forwards, the custom agents. But generally nowadays these all these works are assigned to those agencies who are, specializing in them, who handle this kind of job for most of the organizations. So it is better that a firm, as an exporting firm, focuses more on its products and the international marketing, and all these functions like freight forwarding and customs and insurance and other things may be taken care of by the those agencies or intermediaries, or I would say service organizations who, they who specialize in these functions. Is it okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now comes the another important uh, method of entry. We'll be, revisiting these concepts again and again, and that's why we are just having a very very brief and a very very superficial kind of a discussion. The real insights we can get into these issues by reading the cases. So I'll try to give the topic of the case and about the McDonald's operations, and then you can just search it on the internet and download it for yourselves. Okay, or you can share it amongst yourselves. So now here, as we all understand it, but we are making a formal effort that licensing is a mode which involves a licensor and a licensee, right? So the parent organization is the licensor. So the McDonald's Corporation, which is located in the USA, is the licensor, and all other business partners in different countries, they are its licensees who obtain a license. But we'll carry on. Although in case of the service chain, in case of say fast food, the licensing arrangement is called as franchising. I wish somebody had, kind of interrupted me on this, right? So licensing is basically granting the licensee a right, a limited right, I would say, not complete right, a limited right to use the brand name, to use the technology, right? And the processes and the know-how, right? In return for royalties. So whatever, the companies, like for example, the different apparel brands like Arrow, like Levi's Strauss or Lee, they have given license to the different companies located in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and they provide the design, they provide the brand name, they provide the necessary support in terms of advertising and communication, in terms of the setup of the stores, the exclusive outlets, and so on. And in return, they get a royalty on the profits which are being generated by the licensees in their individual countries, right? So the licensor offers the know-how, shares the technology, and allows for the use of its brand name. So in such situation, the job of the licensee is, becomes very less, because the licensee is getting an established brand name. It is getting the technical know-how, it is getting the technological support, it is getting the consultancy in case there are some problems in the market. So the top management at the licensor's place or in the home country can help in sorting out the problems. So for the payment of royalty for the rights to use licenses, technology, know-how, and brand name, and other supports, right? So in a way, the job of the licensee becomes much easy. As we were talking about, the advantages for the of licensing is that it is a lower risk entry mode, and it allows the company to enter into the markets they may have, which may have the high entry barriers, right? But at the same time, as we were discussing yesterday, that the licensee, the company to which the licensor has given the right to manufacture a particular product using its technology, using its expertise, using the brand name over a period of time, that company can launch its own brands, right? It can launch brands in the local market, and also maybe if they become popular, they can it can sell them in the international market. So there is always this some kind of a risk that the licensee can produce new products, and it can become, instead of being a business partner, the licensee can rise up as a formidable competitor, right? Then second thing is, this is a very very serious issue, that it can be a problematic situation if the licensee cannot guarantee quality, right? A very important point. If you remember, yesterday we were talking about the service quality of products across the different outlets of the same fast food chain, right? So when it comes to products, the problem becomes all the more serious, because if there is no uniformity or standardization of the quality, then the customers will not accept it, and maybe they might not like it, and this would result in the loss of reputation for the original brand. It will also result in the loss of market share, and the entire effort, and the kind of resources which go into making this licensing arrangement work. All these things will go in vain, right? So in some cases, some companies have, in order to protect wherever they are, somewhat, kind of, they are in a state of doubt. So they follow a policy that they don't permit the usage of their parent or the umbrella brand, and they ask the licensee to come up with some local brand name. One example is given, that in USSR, erstwhile USSR, the name for the Fiat cars was called as the Lada, or in Romania, the Renault cars, they were known as Dacia. So you can develop a local, you know, brand name, right? So that is one thing. But overall, this is a fairly useful mode, and you may say that the companies can, take, or they can undertake a calculated risk of entering into the foreign markets without committing much of their resources, right? It is definitely a lower risk mode of entering into the foreign markets by partnering with the licensee. Obviously, there are terms and conditions which become a part of the licensing contract, and they may vary from company to company and country to country. When you extend this concept of licensing in the service industry, right? That is perhaps the only difference between licensing and franchising. That licensing is primarily for the tangible products, and franchising is, you would say, is the concepts, the extension of licensing in case of service industry, right? So, and that's why it is mentioned franchising is a special form of license. It is not different from licensing, but it is a form or it is a kind of licensing in which the international firm provides intangible assets and methods of doing business in a prescribed manner, right? So again, the aim is to go for a standardized kind of service delivery. That is very very important. How to ensure that uniformity in terms of the taste, in terms of the service ambience, in terms of service practices. So this is where lies the real challenge. Extending the same, when we talk about the McDonald's burger. So back of the mind, let me just ask you what exactly is going on in the mind of the consumer. You tell me, why would anybody go for, eating a McDonald's burger? What kind of satisfaction you derive by going into a McDonald's outlet? Yes.
Sir, according to me,
Their
McDonald
quality is
is
consistent.
Okay. Yes, please carry on.
sir. McDonald is reputed brand globally, and they know what consumer wants and their
Okay.
taste preferences.
Okay.
Sir, it's also cheaper if we compare it to with Burger King or other brands.
Okay, very good. What else? Yes, very very correct. You're talking about quality.
So they
Talking
have
about
special
the
schemes for kids such as Happy Meal.
okay, very good. That's also fine. That's also fine, right? So it's you're talking about price, the economy meals. You're talking about the happy meals. You're talking about happy hours, right? But that is very much true. But at the same time, an important thing is that if people who are other than Americans, right, and they're going for eating a burger, right, at the McDonald's, it is somewhere it is trying to satisfy not just the taste buds, not just the pangs of hunger, but at the psychological level, it is also kind of it is a step forward in realizing that the America dream somewhere at your back of your mind. You feel that you are perhaps placed on the same pedestal at the same level with the rest of the consumers internationally. So that is another part. I mean, this has been proved by researches, right? Why would anybody go for gradually this is becoming the whether it is burgers or pasta or you know the pizza and all, these are becoming the more happening food, replacing the kind of food that we are generally used to eat in our homes, which is more wholesome, which is more healthy, which is more complete. But gradually, the preferences, being shifted in the favor of the fast food. So somewhere it also has got to do with the aspirations, the global aspirations, or the global standards of consumption, which we all want to adapt. Do you agree with me?
So,
Yes,
as
sir.
you have mentioned that McDonald's give us a sensation of being somewhat associated with American culture. So, basically, this gives a leverage to the developed countries because the underdeveloped or the developing countries, they are the
Yes.
developed world. But for example, if there is a company in an underdeveloped nation, for example, Africa, then how would it compete with other brands?
Yeah, that is a very important point, very pertinent. But what I was trying to say as I have discussed with you, that what is that the factor, what factors are shaping our or shifting our behavior or preference in favor of fast food like burger, pizza, pasta, and other similar things on the menu, instead of sticking to what we were already used to eat in our homes, right? That the wholesome food, or if I say, given a choice, you know again, obviously it is all debatable. If I offer this, there's an offer of a vada pav and there's an offer of McDonald's burger, maybe the price is same, over where so in such a situation, how you are going to decide that what do you want to eat, although they are almost the same things, right? But one is your the local food, the other one is obviously is an American food item. So that is the basic thing which I was trying to talk about. So moving ahead with our discussion, that just like in case of licensing, here you have a franchisor. So the franchisee, you know so it gives the franchisee a right to use the brand name, the trademarks, the business know-how, the practices, and other things. In addition to that, that is the consultancy, right? And in return of this, the franchisee is going to pay the franchisor the royalties, right? So just like, I mean, you will not find much difference. You find that it's the advantages are that it is a low risk entry mode, and it limits the exposure to the economic, financial, political instability, because there is very less commitment of monetary resources or even the human resources by the parent company. The only thing at stake is the brand name and the reputation of the company. So that is obviously a very, very important thing. Brand name, the goodwill, the reputation, they are all intangible assets, right? But creating a brand name is obviously, it requires years and years of slogging and a lot of satisfied customers across the globe who can vouch for the quality of your product. And then there is a high level of control, because you are controlling the practices, you're controlling the know-how. Everything is in accordance with the prescribed standards. And if you, in fact, long time back, I don't remember exactly the franchise of McDonald's here in India, but when initially McDonald's started its operations in India, so the licensee was required to fly to the USA for the training, right? For the initial training, and they were, this team was given full-fledged training in all the kind of operations which are required in case of running a McDonald's retail fast food chain, from purchasing, sourcing, cooking, packaging, serving, and looking at the overall McDonald's culture. That's very, very important. And you'll find that the culture of these outlets, it varies. You'll find that the Burger King culture is different from the culture of McDonald's outlet, right? So moving further, so the advantages are almost the same. Rapid market penetration, but again, there are problems, especially in case of, as we were talking about, the services, the food outlets, that it can be problematic if the franchisee cannot guarantee the quality, right? That's very, very important. Or again, your franchisee becomes a competitor subsequently once the franchisee learns the secrets of the trade, so they can become your competitor. They can have their own version of products and services, and they can be formidable in them as competitors. Another thing is, this is more problematic if that concept, whether it is the food concept, whether it is a concept related to consultancy, whether it is a concept related to any other services, if it can be easily imitated or copied by other people, then obviously it is a serious issue. And perhaps that is why most of these franchisors, they always have some kind of trade secret, whether it is a secret recipe or some kind of they will never show you the, and rightly so. I mean, they have slogged it out, they have worked out the formula for their services. So some of the things they always keep as a secret, and that obviously keeps their position intact as the franchisor vis-a-vis their franchisee. So that's a kind of a safeguard which they need to have safeguard their position in the international markets. Further, again, relatively low risk mode of entering the international market is the joint venture, right? A new corporate entity or a new company may be created with the participation of two companies which share the equity, which share the capital, the money required to create this company, and the labor, technical know-how, right? Brand names. So in such a situation, this is a very, very preferred entry mode in the developing countries. And in such situation, what happens is that maybe an international partner joins hands with the local company, and then they can float a new company. So one of them, the local partner, has greater influence in case of the local market, understands the law, it understands the government, it understands the consumers, it has its distribution network. So such kind of arrangement is there, whereas the international partner, with its expertise, with its managerial competence and the brand name, so in such a that it can definitely become a success story, provided there's a good gel between the two partners who are entering into this joint venture. So as it is mentioned that the international firm can provide the expertise, know-how, more capital, brand reputation in the trademark, whereas the local partner has, it provides for the labor and all other things which are locally available. But obviously, an important thing is that its relationship and connections with the government, the local government, understanding of the local laws. So all these things, understanding the local culture. So some examples can be, say, for example, ICICI Pru, so Prudential Capital of UK and ICICI Bank of India. And similarly, I mean, there's a plethora of examples. It's like, it's like what you call as co-branding, bringing the two brands together and developing a third brand, which is more, strong by the coming together of two companies. So its advantages, as although we have already talked about. So it's a higher control entry mode for the international company, and there's a potential of higher profits. So it is high control and high profits, and cost and risk are shared with the joint venture partner as per the terms and conditions of the contract. So there is a, as long as both the partners, both the companies are working their role, they're playing their role as per the terms and conditions of the contract. So it may really result into the synergies which can make the organization a success. So that's very, very important. But at the same time, there may be issues related to the repatriation of funds to the foreign partner. That can obviously that may happen only when there's an intervention by the government, or if sometimes if you partner with the government of a country, if you are having a joint venture with the government based company. So in such situations, it may create issues, especially in the developing countries or the less developed countries, right? And similarly, if the things turn out sour between the two partners, then obviously the local partner can become a full-fledged competitor once it has acquired the reputation in the local market of having worked with the international company, and once it has learned the tricks of the trade. So that can also happen. So obviously this pitfall, this is always there, whether it is licensing, whether it is franchising, whether it is joint ventures, that your partner, your licensee, your franchisee, your partner in the joint venture, they may turn out to be your competitors. But obviously, such things happen rarely. Then it's what we see here, that in case of joint ventures, generally we find that it's like coming together of two companies. But when it is more than two companies, 3 or 4, so in such a situation, they can be called as a consortium or consortia, right? So in such situations, a very relevant example is that a consortium of several companies created the firm called Airbus, right? It has a stake of French company, France Aerospatiale 38%, UK British Aerospace, that is 20%, as already given here. Then Germany's Daimler 38%, and Spain's Aeronauticas is 4%. And this was found as a challenge to the kind of monopoly or the predominance that was created by the Boeing company in the manufacturing of aeroplanes. So several companies, they came together to counter the threat of the monopoly that was being lurking around in the in the industry of manufacturing the aeroplanes. Then you can also have your branch offices, your sales office or marketing office. So it is something like, in addition to what you have in your home country, you also set up an office abroad. And so that will take care of most of your international operations. So obviously, this does require commitment of funds, because obviously the firm will be paying for the offices abroad. But at the same time, you get more control. You are closer to you are actually into the